Spring 1994. The world is shocked to witness these horrible images coming from the East African country of Rwanda.
We came across human bodies with missing parts.
The carnage was driven by the Hutu majority group's unvarnished hatred of the minority Tutsi people.
All Tutsi were considered as an enemy of the country. Whether they were babies, old, sick, the Tutsi were the biggest enemy.
Over 100 days of unprecedented bloodshed and brutality, an estimated 1 million Tutsi were murdered, the third largest genocide of the 20th century.
This much violence and cruelty exceeds the limits of our understanding.
To try and comprehend what happened in Rwanda between April and July 1994, we spoke with survivors of the genocide.
I begged my tormentor. I told him, shoot me, because I knew that he had planned to kill me with his machete.
We met with foremost experts on Rwanda, including military personnel and journalists who witnessed these events firsthand.
I can see my fellow comrades shutting their blinders and say, all right, we got a shitty mission, but that's okay because we're professionals, and we're doing it either way.
Through their perspective, along with infographics and archive images, you will understand how the tension mounted among the Rwandan population. You will discover what triggered the 100-day storm of rampant, murderous hatred that appalled and outraged the world in this investigation of one of humanity's worst tragedies, the genocide against the Tutsi. Spring of 1994. Each day, new images went around the world and testified to the dreadful situation that hit Rwanda, a small African country which many ignored the existence. The images are atrocious. The violence is extreme. However, despite the bodies piling up, the international community watches these massacres that are happening in the whole country.
Rwanda was far away. There was an almost racist thought that said, ah, these Africans are killing each other.
The conflict is quickly presented as a war between the Hutu, a majority ethnic group in power, which had a stable army and a horrible presidential guard, and the Tutsi, a minority ethnic group defended by the rebel troops of the Rwanda Patriotic Front.
Back then, actually, an ethnic reading was privileged. There were two ethnic groups who have long hated each other, and no killers on one side and victims on the other. Deep down, everyone was guilty, and we did not look further into it.
In reality, to explain the absolute hatred of the Hutu against the Tutsi, and to understand how they came to wanting to get rid of them to the point of genocide, we need to go back to the end of World War I, when this small African country went under Belgium's guardianship.
Au Rwanda comme en Burundi, on rencontre des groupes ethniques nettement distincts. Les Tutsis, la race dominante, sont venus du nord, menant leurs troupeaux à la recherche de pâturage. Les Hutus, qui représentent 90% de la population, sont des paysans bantous, à l'âme lourde et passive, ignorant tout souci du lendemain.
This TV report was shot in Rwanda at the end of the 1940s by the Belgian television. The journalist's openly racist commentary describes the Rwandan people as composed with two principal ethnic groups, the first being the Tutsi, presented as superior to the second one, the Hutu.
Before the Europeans came to Rwanda, the Hutu and Tutsi were basically two sociopolitical groups. The Tutsi belonged to a sort of aristocracy, while the Hutu represented the people. But these categories are fluid. One can ennoble oneself and become a Tutsi, as well as one can show one's cowardice in time of war, and be stripped of one's aristocratic status.
Tutsi and Hutu were social classes. They were not ethnic groups in the anthropological and sociological sense. Tutsi and Hutu share the same territory. They share the same traditions, the same cultural practice, the same language, the same religion.
However, the Belgian colonizers persisted and signed. They claimed that if the Tutsi were superiors to the Hutu, it was because they were not entirely African.
Something called the Hamitic theory came up and explained that in reality, the Tutsi were so beautiful and capable of giving birth to a civilization because their race was close to white people.
They said, these people in power are not black, they are Hamites. They are white people mixed with black people, or niggers as they said. Therefore, they are white niggers. That's what we called the Tutsi.
Tutsi, who were apparently physically very different from the Hutu, taller, less stocky. Their skin was apparently paler with thinner traits.
Judging on a physical aspect, we cannot ask Rwandans to determine who is Tutsi and who is Hutu, because the height criteria is completely deceiving and absurd even. Some Tutsi are tall, some are small, just as some Hutu are tall and some are small. It's a completely unfounded caricature.
Yet the Belgian colonizers used these racist theories to set up an identification system supposed to legitimize the ethnic belongings within the Rwandan people. From that moment on, even if a child's mother was Tutsi, as long as his father was Hutu, he was 100% Hutu, and vice versa.
Identification was based on a question asked by the census agent. Who are you? And they wrote the answer down. And if someone said, I am Hutu, this ethnic group was written on their identity card.
It was truly filing. The administration didn't need to check if you were Hutu or Tutsi, because it was written on the identity card.
From that moment on, standing on this ethnical filing, Rwandans were victims of an unequal system where the Hutu were condemned to misery and thankless jobs solely because they were inferiors, while the Tutsi went to school and had better, rewarding jobs.
The colonizer decided to lean on what he seemed to be the Tutsi elite and created resentment within the Hutu population, which resentment happens to be mass murder's greatest fuel.
Resentment, mainly caused by the Belgian colonizer, and whose consequences turned out to be tragic. On November 1st, 1959, a new party called the Hutu Emancipation Movement started a revolution. This popular insurrection, led by a certain Gregoire Kayibanda, aimed to fix the injustice the Hutu went through by expelling the Tutsi out of the country.
In 1959, everything exploded. The basically armed Hutu lunged at the Tutsi to kill them. From 1959, Tutsi huts burned on the hills. Goods were stolen, people were massacred, there was violence, and people were killed.
Between 1960 and 1967, around 27,000 people were murdered, and a few thousand others were forced into exile in the neighboring countries.
In the beginning of the 1960s, as Gregoire Kayibanda became president and Rwanda declared its independence in 1962, an estimated 300,000 Tutsi went into exile in the neighboring countries. Almost 40% sought refuge in the north, in Uganda. 30% went to Burundi in the south. 20% emigrated west to Zaire, actual Democratic Republic of the Congo. The remaining 10% found asylum in the east in Tanzania. From that moment on, the Tutsi were not welcome in Rwanda anymore, and those who stayed faced the consequences.
What happened in 1959 was the signal, but most of all, the setting of a completely anti-Tutsi system, conceived as a country that solely belonged to the Hutu.
Then it was a revolution that turned Tutsi into second-zone people, people who were targeted, monitored, discriminated, assigned.
Isaac Kayiranga and his family were part of the 100,000 of Tutsi who stayed in Rwanda. He holds a painful memory of this time when the ethnical identity cards set up by the Belgian colonizers allowed daily humiliations.
This identity card belongs to my sister. On the second page, under the picture, the ethnic group is mentioned. As you can see here, we crossed Hutu, Twa, and naturalized. Tutsi is left to show that she was Tutsi. Hatred was spread among Rwandans. When I was a student, our teacher would come in front of us each morning and say, "Hutu, get up." A lot of them would get up. "Tutsi, get up." 2 or 3 of us in a class of 40 students would get up, and they booed us to traumatize us. That was every morning.
The Tutsi stigma was perpetuated by Juvénal Habyarimana, who came to power following a coup d'etat in July 1973. He was a despot who ruled his country, but who applied himself to presenting himself as a sympathetic and open-minded leader during official trips overseas.
He fooled everyone because he carried this image, let's say, of a man of peace. He was a Catholic, so it obviously comforted France. So Habyarimana had the aura of a good and peaceful man.
A clever communication strategy with a simple goal, finding generous partners who would help him get his country out of economic crisis. And he found an unexpected and providential ally in the French state.
Je vais en profiter pour transmettre les remerciements du peuple rwandais pour l'aide que la France a consentie et demander surtout que cette aide non seulement continue, mais soit encore intensifiée et en quantité et en qualité, compte tenu du fait que cette amitié est profonde.
This partnership and friendship between France and Rwanda was initiated in the 1970s by then French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing and got a whole other meaning under François Mitterrand's presidency starting in 1990. That year, Rwanda was threatened to be attacked by an armed rebel group that called itself the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, and which members were Tutsi exiles for the better part. Fred Wigema and Paul Kagame, 2 children of exiled people who found refuge in Uganda, led this guerrilla force.
These 2 men left Rwanda on their mother's back at a very young age in 1959 and grew up in refugee camps. They decided to carry the voice of refugees who asked and demanded a right to go back to their country.
There were Tutsi who were now armed and experienced because they had taken part in the Ugandan civil wars. And me, well, I was in the guerrilla force as a spectator. We could clearly see that the force was far superior in terms of military capacity.
For Hutu President Juvénal Habyarimana, the RPF was a threat. He was willing to do anything to convince François Mitterrand, the French president, to help him. During an official visit in the month of April 1990, he did not hesitate to lie by describing these Tutsi exiles as foreign attackers.
The Habyarimana regime saw the RPF as a great danger. The foreign attack theory actually allowed Habyarimana to ask France for help. And France said, "We defend a sovereign regime, a sovereign country facing a foreign attack."
On October 1st, 1990, the Tutsi rebels of the RPF finally reached Rwanda through Uganda's borders, passing through the city of Kagitumba. Juvénal Habyarimana contacted Jean-Christophe Mitterrand, the president's son, who was then his counselor for African matters. He immediately transferred the message to his father, who was on a business trip in the Gulf countries. Admiral Langsade, successively chief of the military staff and chief of the defense staff for François Mitterrand, remembers this phone call very well.
We were with the president, and during dinner, we got a call from the Élysée saying that President Habyarimana was asking for France's intervention because he was very worried about the RPF's progress coming from Uganda and threatening Kigali.
Hubert Védrine, successively spokesperson, then Secretary General of the Élysée, was then one of Mitterrand's closest collaborators. He was part of the president's restricted council, which then chose to help Juvénal Habyarimana under some conditions.
Mitterrand gave a speech at the France-Afrique Classical Summit in La Boule, where he said, "We shall give up on no one, for we have some sort of historical responsibility, but we shall further help countries that will move towards democracy."
Habyarimana accepted the conditions set by François Mitterrand, who then immediately gave the order to trigger Operation Norrois, a mission which principal objective was initially limited to the protection of French interests in Rwanda.
Then the president immediately instructed me to call the chief of the defense staff and to set up 2 infantry companies the next day to protect our French nationals. We evacuated nearly 300 people and protected French interests. During the French military presence in Kigali, forces were not allowed to engage in combat. So it was basically deterrence.
However, Operation Norrois soon turned into military aid that aimed to help the Rwandan Armed Forces, the RAF, to fight against the RPF's incursions on Rwandan territory.
If France had not intervened to give a hell of a helping hand to Habyarimana, I think the RPF could have taken Rwanda in Kigali from the start.
My comrades and I typically formed the artillery groups that prevented Kagame's soldiers to take power every year. They committed mass murders. I'm sorry, actually, it was war. But they terminated entire RPF units. And when my comrades spoke with their Rwandan counterpart, they would tell them, "Don't worry, we're preparing a terminal solution."
Far beyond the official speeches destined to comfort the French partnership, the unofficial mission of the Rwandan armed forces of the Habyarimana regime was not limited to simply fight RPF soldiers.
On September 21st, 1992, a document was published by the Rwandan army. It came from a commission that had been set up by President Habyarimana with the aim, and I quote, of identifying how one can overcome the enemy of a political, military, and diplomatic stance.
The main enemy is the Tutsi from the inside as well as the outside, who wants to take back their power by all means, including military.
What does this document say? It's a strong document. It says that the main enemy was the Tutsi, which means that all Tutsi were considered enemies of the country, whether they were babies, old, or sick. The enemy was identified by the Rwandan army, and that ideology was then taught in every military and police unit.
Patrick de Saint-Exupéry, a great French reporter and African specialist, was sent to Kigali at the beginning of Operation Norrois by the Figaro, a great national newspaper. On site, he immediately stated the violence outbreaks targeted against the Tutsi living in Rwanda. The government considered them as RPF spies.
The first time I came to Rwanda was in October 1990. There were massive roundups in Kigali. In the police stations, you could see the violence and the frightened looks in people's eyes. I remember I met an official who left his office carrying boxes and who told me, "This is the list of the people we need to eradicate."
During Operation Noir, militaries, civilians, and NGOs alerted on what was happening, which was the extremely great brutalizing of the ruling power. That meant the establishment of lists of people to kill. That also meant murders that were happening daily.
Yet despite the numerous warnings, notably from French militaries and diplomats on site, François Mitterrand refused to face the truth and was adamant on supporting the Habyarimana regime. He was convinced he was able to settle this conflict in a political and diplomatic manner.
The civil war had to be blocked because it would lead to mass murders. But a political compromise had to be imposed, which would allow us to retire if we were successful.
A political compromise finally happened despite the violence and the mechanics of hatred settled by the Habyarimana regime. We are then in Arusha, Tanzania, in August 1993. The Rwandan president finally accepted to sign peace agreements with his opponents from the RPF, notably General Paul Kagame.
The Arusha Accords represented hope. They were signed in August 1993, and they brought hope for external and internal peace, which meant a genuine distribution of power. The Arusha Accords planned to merge the Rwandan armed forces and the RPF troops.
On the military side, the new Rwandan army would be composed at 60% of the former governmental forces and at 40% of the RPA and the RPF army. There were also protocols on the agreement of the return of the refugees. Refugees started to come back. There was an RPF battalion that settled in Kigali. We even had some French cooperants to help them build an army. In other words, we thought we were successful.
Civil war was officially over in Rwanda, but this fragile peace suddenly flipped upside down. The day was April 6, 1994. A Falcon 50 flying from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, with 12 people on board, including Rwandan President Juvénal Habyarimana, exploded mid-flight, a few minutes before it was supposed to land. It was considered an attack, for the plane was allegedly hit by a Type SAM-16 anti-aircraft missile.
2 missiles were shot simultaneously at night. But it turns out that when you shoot portable missiles at night, the missile leaves a trail of phosphorescent smoke over 500 meters. Let me tell you that at night, it's as if you could indicate the shooter's location by pointing at them. And they shot them from the Kanobe camp, which was then led by the Presidential Guard. You would not imagine for 1 second that shooters, other than the ones protected by the Presidential Guard, could have shot from the camp where the guard was without being killed.
The ballistic analysis seemed to have definitely excluded the hypothesis of a shooting executed and commanded by the RPF. Yet at the time, the government, led by extremists, immediately accused Paul Kagame's men. Sad news for the Tutsi, who had decided to stay in Rwanda.
The attack was a powerful justification to the population to account for the death of the Tutsi. We can even see it in the testimonies of farmers. I have this scene in mind of a child who said that Interamwe militiamen came to see his father and said, "You took down the plane in which our parent was." And the child's father said, "But I was home. I did not take this plane down." He told him, "No, it was you, the Tutsi."
This pretext triggered the genocide. It began in the following minutes with the officers of the Presidential Guard who, with lists in hands of celebrities to take down, started with the Prime Minister, who was moderate, by the way. They triggered the genocide in the night following April 6.
In all corners of Rwanda, barricades were installed to control the infamous ethnic identity cards. These were the means the genocidal government auxiliaries employed to identify the Tutsi with the help of a part of the population.
Rwanda was filled with barricades. On every trail, every road, every bridge, everything was blocked by neighbors who guarded these barricades day and night and filtered the population.
They were tracked down in an entire country with a very dense population, and where the Tutsi faced a landscape they could not seek refuge in.
When the genocide began, the Hutu population spent days listening to the Radio des Mille Collines hosts, which was then the first media in Rwanda.
It truly was the genocide's medium, meaning that it aired conspiracy theories and mass racism from morning till evening in a country where oral speech prevails. So in other words, the radio was even more essential because there was no electricity in the hills, so no television. All that was left was the radio and a few batteries you put in the transistor.
Muze twishime nshuti inkotanyi zashize muze twishime nshuti yewe imana ntirenganya.
The radio television des Mille Collines, that we knew under the name Radio Machete, aired Congolese music that was trendy to attract younger people. And from that moment on, they aired calls for Tutsi hatred through that music, both in Kinyarwanda and in French.
The journalists who worked on that radio station were the best. I think of Habyarimana Kantano, who was known for his sports journalist talents, and who put his talents to use by using his breathless tone. That was his way of gaining attention during the anti-Tutsi propaganda.
N'ingabo zayo mu by'ukuri inkotanyi zizashira ibyo birumvikana ko zizashira zikarangira rwose muri iki gihugu urebye ko zipfa wagira ngo zirazuka ariko zo ziribeshya ngo zirazuka ariko ntabwo zizuka zirashira buhoro buhoro.
Dehumanization was such that, in the end, we could fearlessly kill them. It was okay to kill them. They were beasts. So there was dehumanization. They were roaches, but there were also accusations of cruelty.
An RTLM journalist called Valerie Bemeriki said they dismembered the bodies of Hutu to eat their insides. That they took babies and threw them against walls. So what did all this create? It created fear among the Hutu, meaning that if they didn't kill the Tutsi, they would kill them.
Encouraged by the propaganda, the Hutu population started to participate in the massacres too. This psychosis spread in all Rwanda.
It was the first time we saw crimes being committed within families, meaning that a father killed his son and vice versa, a husband killed his wife and vice versa, a child killed his father or mother. Even your own father, who you did not see as a parent, but as an enemy. You saw your mother as an enemy. You saw your son, your brother as an enemy and not as a family member. It was unbelievable, never seen before.
There was this atrocious case that a Rwandan Hutu priest told me. He had a regular member of the church who was a good Catholic, who was married to a Tutsi woman. His Tutsi wife told him, "Kill me." And he said, "But you're my wife. I don't want to kill you." She said, "Another will come and do it. I know you won't hurt me, and I know we will look at each other one last time." He killed her and came to see the priest and told him, "Am I going to hell?" To which he said, "No, because your intentions were good."
Rwanda had become a rightless zone where no one was protected by their status, including nuns. In Gisenyi, in the northwest of Rwanda, close to the borders with Zaire, Marie-Claire Mukawugero a young seminary member, also tried to escape the massacres. She then found refuge in the Saint-Pierre Center, a dispensary held by Sister Félicité Nitegeka, a Hutu nun who had sworn in the name of her faith that she would help the victims of these monstrosities by all means.
A lot of people found refuge here, in the Saint-Pierre Center, because it was so close to Zaire. They thought Sister Félicité could help them cross the border.
To save the persecuted Tutsi, Sister Félicité took advantage of her nun status, but also of her brother's protection, who was a colonel in the Rwandan armed forces. Militiamen were ready to spare her, but refused to spare the Tutsi she protected.
Her brother wanted to save her at all costs. He even wrote her to beg her to join him. When Félicité replied, she thanked him for the help, but she told him, "I refuse to give up on these people. I am ready to die with them."
Sister Félicité was determined to give her life, despite her brother's attempts to save her. On the night of April 21, 1994, she was taken to a field along with 30 other people to be killed. Marie-Claire was in this funeral procession.
I thought it was the end of the world. They ordered us to kneel on the grass. There was a militiaman I went to school with. When he came to me, I begged him. I told him, "Shoot me," because I could see that he had planned to kill me with his machete.
After a never-ending few minutes, the militiamen opened fire. Marie-Claire miraculously escaped it and managed to fool her tormentors by pretending to be dead. But that night, she was the only survivor. Sister Félicité and all the other Tutsi refugees were shot. This tragedy was far from the only one. The country had now become a giant open-air graveyard. Bernard Kouchner, a former doctor and French Minister of Health, went to Rwanda with the NGO Doctors of the World to try and settle a humanitarian corridor and evacuate Tutsi orphans.
I found a sort of horror that I couldn't imagine, that I didn't understand. From the moment we came down or went further away from the hotel, we came across bodies. But bodies, not one or two, but heaps of bodies. We came across human bodies with missing parts. It's hard to imagine the horror. And most of all, the inertia that took over. What do you do? Where do you begin?
When he came back to France, Bernard Kouchner contacted François Mitterrand. His goal was to make him understand that it was not an ethnic war between the Tutsi and Hutu that struck Rwanda, but a genocide.
I regularly called François Mitterrand. He would answer the phone, and when I told him for the first time, when I found out about a tiny part of the extent of the massacre, I told him, "You are mistaken, Mr. President. The Hutu are killing, murdering, eradicating, and want to kill all the Tutsi." And I told him, "Mr. President, we walk on dead children's bodies." I remember his reply, "Oh, Kouchner, I know you. You always exaggerate things."
Yet despite this denial response, President François Mitterrand, who always kept a close eye on the Rwandan file, tried to push the international community to put an end to the massacres.
At the time, France tried to push England and the United States into a joint operation. It did not succeed. I remember I had a conversation with the American authorities. They had no intention of engaging in one way or another.
Finally, on June 22, 1994, the UN grants France its approval to send troops to Rwanda with the support of Senegalese soldiers contingent. Codename for this operation, Turquoise. Guillaume Ancel, then captain in the Foreign Legion, remembers the official mission order.
The official mission was presented to the media as, we were mandated by the UN to intervene in Rwanda. The official objective for this intervention is a humanitarian intervention with military means to come between two ethnic groups who are allegedly killing each other.
Once again, despite the warnings, François Mitterrand refuses to adhere to the genocide theory. General Sartre, then colonel in the Special Operations Command, remembers the contrast between the mission he received and the reality of the terrain when he arrived in Rwanda.
The problem was that the analysis of the situation Paris had given us did not exactly correspond to what we found on site. We can say that our arrival stopped the fights, which were not really fights, but solely massacres, obviously. The Hutu believed in the first place that we had come to help them.
When we first arrived on site, they first believed that we were there to help them finish the job. That was how they mentioned it, and they boasted about the massacres they did. And I saw my comrades shutting their blinders down and say, all right, we got a shitty mission, but that's okay, because we are professionals, and we're doing it either way, and then we'll leave as soon as possible.
Upon penetrating into Rwanda's territory, the French armed forces men immediately saw the contrast between the Hutu enthusiasm on one side, who were singing, dancing, and welcomed them as heroes, and on the other side, the Tutsi, who were terrified and who told them the nightmare they were going through.
Ils sont venus chez nous, ils ont cassé tout, ils ont détruit toutes les maisons. Et puis, nous sommes réfugiés. Les autres ont été tués, surtout les maris, les hommes.
On a assassiné tous mes parents. Donc, je suis ici, moi seule.
We quickly understood that the situation differed from what we were told. We first understood it through our observations. And then the French press told us that we did not understand the situation, that it was a genocide situation and not a confrontation situation. So they very quickly put us up to date.
Among the journalists sent to Rwanda, there was Patrick de Saint-Exupéry, a correspondent for the Figaro, a great French newspaper. The tragedy that took place on the Bisesero Hills in the southwest of the country helped him realize what really happened in Rwanda between the months of April and June in 1994.
We arrived on the Bisesero Hill, and we saw a few bodies along the road. The first man came out upon seeing us. This guy's name was Eric. And he told us about Bisesero. He said, we have been hunted for 3 months. The hill is full of dead bodies, of dead people. They're everywhere. We dumbly replied, but where? Well, there. And he lifted dirt clods, and there were bodies, and here they were. And Bisesero was basically a field filled with dead people. And as he was telling us all this, the Hutu gathered on small peaks all around us. The murderers sang and danced all around us, and we saw them sing and dance on all sorts of small pythons. And the refugees told us, stay, save us, help us. My comrades from the Air Parachute Commando saw them first. What they saw was zombies, people covered in wounds who had nothing and who were starving. So there was a sort of fiction that crumbled in their eyes. They understood that if our mission was humanitarian, we would have to take care of them. So they asked for permission to protect the zone in which the refugees were in order to stop the genocide instigators to come after them. And they received an unbelievable order, which was to come back to the base immediately, because it was not what their mission consisted in.
The mission preventing the Air Parachute Commando to intervene in Bisesero consisted in evacuating a great part of the Hutu population to Zaire, which was now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, between the cities of Goma in the north and Bukavu in the south. They fled, seeing the Rwanda Patriotic Front's progression, while Paul Kagame's men chained victories and progressively put an end to the genocide. Hundreds of thousands of Hutu in the run were thus exfiltrated towards Zaire with France's help.
These people were left to themselves. There was a good part of the Hutu population that fled to the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in the Goma region. And what was even more tragic was the cholera epidemic in Goma. So we settled in a military medical aid in Goma to treat the cholera epidemic.
So then we bragged about being part of a humanitarian operation. But I remember very well the military doctors who were on site told me, "Guillaume, we must treat them. It's the Hippocratic Oath. But we are currently saving instigators of the genocide. What are we here for?"
An awkward feeling then settled among the soldiers and humanitarians taking part in Operation Turquoise. They stated that among this human mass, there were militiamen, policemen, militaries, but also Hutu members of the extremist government. In other words, those who planned the genocide and those who put it into action.
We almost felt like there were two Operations Turquoise. There was an official mission, one that responded to the UN mandate. It was a highly respectable humanitarian mission. And there was an operation led by the Special Forces, which for me was directed by the Élysée, and consisted in exfiltrating the genocide organizers and settling them in refugee camps in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Most of all, we prevented the RPF from entering the zone. The RPF, which goal was to come and help the massacred Tutsi. And that was obviously a mistake that France did not realize. Much more out of clumsiness and incompetence rather than the will to harm the Tutsi.
Was France really complicit to the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda? This question is still debatable to this day.
When we say complicit, it does not mean that there was a true wish to take part in a genocide. And yet, the French government was complicit to a genocidal government. For us, there is no discussion possible. For me, who was so close to François Mitterrand and who spent 14 years with him at the Élysée, there is a very big difference with regular criticism, regular controversies that take place in the democratic and political life of a great country such as France. For me, I think it's different. I think it's unacceptable to say that France under Mitterrand was complicit to a genocide.
In 2019, a commission of experts led by historian Vincent Duclerc was created to put an end to the controversy that poisoned the relationship between France and Rwanda for nearly 30 years. After 2 years of studying meticulously the French state archives, the commission published a report of nearly 1,200 pages whose conclusions are unequivocal.
Archives clearly spoke for themselves. We were able to come to clear conclusions on France's responsibility in the genocide against the Tutsi. We determined heavy and overwhelming responsibilities of the Republic during the two François Mitterrand mandates between 1981 and 1995.
France would not officially be complicit in the genocide, but it had a heavy and overwhelming responsibility. one that allowed a part of instigators to escape.
We did not help them kill, but we helped them manage the post-genocide part in a less risky situation for them. And that is a fact. It is not contrary to the mandate the UN had given us. But history condemned us for that situation, and history is never wrong.
For when Paul Kagame's men took control of Kigali on July 4th, 1994, and put a definitive end to the genocide, a considerable number of criminals took advantage of Operation Turquoise and escaped.
There was a high number of instigators, great organizers, civilians, politicians, militaries. They left Rwanda and scattered in different parts of the world, and some of them even changed their identity.
Nevertheless, there was a certain amount of these killers who reorganized in Zaire and who had one goal, which was to retake the power they had lost in Rwanda. When the RPF soldiers decided to pursue them throughout Zaire, a certain amount were killed. Others managed to escape, whether because they had the means or because they knew people in Europe or in a high number of Western African countries.
A big amount of the genocide's responsibles were finally arrested, brought to justice, and sentenced to life imprisonment.
From November 1994, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was created and settled in Arusha, Tanzania. Its goal was to judge the great organizers of the genocide, including Bagosora, who we consider as the creator, the designer of the genocide.
The greatest thinkers, the intellectuals, the thinkers never pleaded guilty and persisted in negationist thinking all throughout their trial. Starting with Nahimana, Bagosora, all these people did not believe in the genocide. Bagosora said there were excessive massacres, but no genocide.
A few years ago, Paul Kagame, now president of Rwanda, decided to create Minubumwe, the Ministry of National Unity and Civic Engagement. Its mission consisted in managing the memory of the genocide against the Tutsi, but also in the fight against this tragedy's negationist thinking.
Rwanda worked with the UN and the other international organizations to have a repressive system for negationist thinking as it exists for Holocaust denial. And secondly, there was work to be done on the unity and resilience of the Rwanda people. Because we came an interesting way these past 25 years with the installation of institutions such as gachachas. Gachachas is a customary system that allowed to settle the genocide contentious for nearly 2 million people who were brought to justice.
Gachacha are village court holes that manage to unclog the criminal court holes by judging those we called the genocide's little hands, men and women who were manipulated by the government and the genocidal media and who had committed the irreparable. After they served their time, some moved to what we call reconciliation villages. Located in the Bugesera district, 40 kilometers from Kigali, the village of Biyo, created in 2004, was one of these places where refugees now live side by side with instigators.
When the persecutors came out of jail, we organized meetings between those who had been freed and their victims, we, the genocide survivors. Criminals asked for forgiveness for the crimes they committed, but they could not pay back for all the houses they had destroyed. So the NGO Prison Fellowship Rwanda suggested they build houses for the victims, but with the goal to have everyone live together, victims and persecutors.
Jeanette, a survivor who lost her parents in the genocide, and Alois, a repented persecutor, are the symbol of this successful reconciliation. They are neighbors, and despite the numerous hardships they went through, they have managed to move past their differences.
My name is Alois, and I am part of those who perpetuated the genocide against the Tutsi. We have to put ourselves back in context. The regime in power told us that the nation's enemy was the Tutsi, and the Tutsi were dangerous. We believed them, and we actually committed these murders. If there were survivors, it was not out of will, it was God who saved them. We did wrong, and today, we have to live with it.
Some of us moved in the village after choosing to forgive. Nobody made us do it. It was rather a choice dictated by our conscience. Today, I live in this village and I feel Rwandan first and foremost. I am no longer identified as Tutsi, and he is no longer identified as Hutu. We are all Rwandan.
The unity of the Rwandan people is a message of hope in a country where the notion of ethnicity has now disappeared from identity cards. It is thanks to this feeling of national cohesion that the country of 1,000 hills, which was nothing but a ruin after the genocide, has managed to reconstruct to become a prosperous and dynamic nation. To forgive, but to never forget, has become the new motto for Rwanda, which prioritized work on the memory. It is a country where memorial sites destined to pay tribute to the victims are omnipresent. To remind those tempted to deny the existence of this genocide, that 1 million of innocent men, women, and children, whether they were Tutsi or moderated Hutu, were in fact massacred, not for their deed, but simply for who they were.